Hello, good morning to you. Thank you so much for staying here on the AM show. I'm Bernice Abu-Baidoo Lansah. As you may be aware, the national daily minimum wage has been increased to 14 cedis, 88 pesos, and this was announced by the National Tripartite Committee in line with Section 113 Clause 1A of the Labour Act 2003 Act 651. Now, this will take effect from the 1st of January 2023. Now, here's what we'd like to do here. My colleague Kofi Ej with our research desk is standing by, and he'll be taking us through the various increases over the next 5 years. We'll also have discussions with a rep from the TUC on what exactly went into the discussions and the final arrival on this particular figure as our national daily minimum wage. Mr. Ken Chinibwa-Kodia will be joining us via Zoom. He is Vice Chair of the Trades Union Congress. So while I get my colleague to join us shortly, let me just let you in on details of that communique by the National Tripartite Committee. And it says that in determining the 2023 national daily minimum wage, which translates into 14.88, the NTC, that's the National Tripartite Committee, took into account the current economic challenges, the cost of living, sustainability of business, and desirability of attaining a higher level of employment, as well as the need for rapid restoration of macroeconomic stability. So Kofi Ej is ready for us. Hello, Kofi. Great to have you here once again. Just run us through what you've been able to determine. We know that in nominal terms, this is an increase of about, what, 1 cedi?
1 cedi, 35 pesos. So you're right, now the minimum wage is 14 cedis, 88 pesos, almost 15 cedis. But there's something special in terms of this new minimum wage. It simply means that if you look at this 14 cedis, 88 pesos, workers will be getting this increase, which is 10 pesos, and also a 15% COLA. So whilst you get your daily minimum wage increasing, you also be cushioned by, this 15% COLA next year. But we've been tracking the data, what has been Ghana's minimum wage right from 2012 to 2022. What has been the trajectory in terms of the minimum wage. So 2012, if you were a worker, your daily minimum wage was around 4 cedis, 48 pesos. Now it moved from 4 cedis, 48 pesos now to 5 cedis, 24 pesos. And you can actually see the upward trajectory right from 2013 to 2019, where minimum wage was somewhere around, 10 cedis, 65 pesos. But during COVID, there was an increase from 10 cedis to now 11 cedis, 82 pesos. And what we have currently, 14 cedis, 80 pesos. But mind you, 2022, the rate has actually changed twice. We first had the first one, which was around, 13 cedis, 53 pesos. And currently we are having, 14 cedis, 88 pesos. It tells you that, with the current economic, crisis we are facing, has actually forced government to, do an upward adjustment of minimum wage twice this year, from, first one being 13 cedis, 53 pesos, and 14 cedis, 88.
Right, Kofi Ej, but I think it's important to mention that this will take effect on the 1st of January 2023, technically.
But the announcement alone
tells you something, of course. And from what I read, we are being told that they took into account the current economic challenges.
Absolutely.
But Kofi, we've seen an upward trend, yes. But the real deal is whether your standard of living and the percentage of increase really tally. You've got more to share with us.
So if you look at how much a Ghanaian earns every month, so assuming you are earning 3,000 cedis a month, last time we did the analysis, just because inflation is now somewhere 40.4%, or even using the 37.2% inflation, you've lost almost 1,800 Ghana cedis just because of inflation. So inflation is actually acting like an invincible tax on your income. So you were earning 3,000 at the beginning of the year, or let's say October last year, and currently that same 3,000, if it has not been increased, its value has now moved from 3,000 to now 1,800. So imagine the kind of disposable income that you've lost. Mind you that producer price index, or the cost of producer inflation, has now moved from 40 to now 65.2. Inflation is now 40.2. So consumers are actually going through a lot. But if you look at the average Ghanaian, you will need about, let's say, 50 cedis a day to survive. You need 50 cedis a day to survive. And if you look at the minimum wage being around 14 cedis, 88 pesos, it means if I simply buy, a bag of sachet water, which is now around, 12 cedis, I'll be left with just, 40 pesos as change. So you ask the question, what can I actually do with my minimum wage? But it becomes, a bit worrying, actually worrying, if you convert this minimum wage to dollars.
Okay.
So if you look at the minimum wage, which is now 14 cedis, 80 pesos, if I, to be diplomatic, and I use the Bank of Ghana interbank rate of, let's say, 13 cedis, that means the minimum wage is around $1 and some 13 cents. But that's actually below, we'll look at it, it's below the international poverty line. So it means Ghana's minimum wage is below the international poverty line. But we've been tracking how much government has been adding to the minimum wage right from 2013 to 2012. So the last time we had anything around 10% was in 2020 itself, when COVID struck, where minimum wage was increased by 10.57%. And then there was a decline from the 10% that was added now to 6%. And right from 2021, we've seen an upward trajectory in terms of how much government is adding every year as minimum wage, 6% to some 7.98%. Then currently we have the 10% upward adjustment. But we're talking about minimum wage and then the international poverty line. We know Ghana, we mentioned poverty as multidimensional, so probably this may not really be a worry, but it's still a good indicator to look at and see where our minimum wage, look at the difference between the poverty line and the current minimum wage of, some 14 cedis, 88 pesos. If you convert it to dollars, just $1 and some 13 cents. So just look at this trend. It's quite worrying if you look at the trend and then see the gap between minimum wage and poverty line.
Right, Kofi. So this is done in dollar terms, USD.
Yeah.
So if a cedi was performing better against the dollar, we probably
indirectly your minimum wage will increase.
Will be above the poverty line.
Yeah.
Interesting. But there's more to share on this, right?
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the trend. So you can see this gap being replicated there, but inversely. So if you look at somewhere 2012, where the dollar was, the cedi was performing, quite well against the dollar, we saw that our, minimum wage was above the poverty line. So the poverty line was around $1.25. Minimum wage was some $2.40, and then you can actually see it was maintained. But right from there, we've seen Ghana's minimum wage, declining from, the same $2.40 to some, $1.9, and then you see the, fluctuations from 2014 right to 2021.
I'm just looking at the representation of the data, and it's such a sharp decline. Looking from 2021 downwards, and one would just wonder what exactly. I mean, we all know what happened in 2020, going up to 20 with COVID and all, but it's just not good, when you have to translate this into the real lives of people.
Absolutely. It simply means that now, if you are living in Ghana, you need a lot to actually survive, because there's an invincible tax called inflation affecting you. Producers, cost of production have increased, literally affecting inflation, and your salary has not been increased, but day in and day out, you see prices of food items going up. If you look at diesel and petrol, for instance, barring the change that actually occurred yesterday, diesel are actually gone up by more than 255%, petrol up by 111%. And they were actually the top two drivers of the 40.4 inflation that we spoke about, the October inflation. So basically, if you just even look at transport fares, so you're just spending your entire, salary or wage on transport, because if you look at between just last month, transport fares went up twice. by 25%, the next one was also 25%. They'll tell you it was 19%, but if you do the real calculation, you realize that both upward adjustments were all 25%. And if you look at transport fares, it's actually up by more than 60% just this year. So you ask yourself, your salary has not been increased. It's just now that we are seeing minimum wage, seeing an upward adjustment. And that will even take effect.
But the big question is, Kofi, and we know that a lot of workers in this country earn way above the minimum wage. Would this necessarily translate into an increase in salaries for workers? I've got the Vice Chairman of the Trades Union Congress, Bernice Abu-Baidoo Lansah, and I'm going to be having that interaction with him. But I'll leave you to do something first. Well, I'll come back to you for that. First off, let's just calculate if an employer decides to give the basic minimum wage for 20 working days, how much is somebody going to earn as against the needed amount to survive in this country? And we'll do that. So
it's not that much, somewhere around 460 cedis.
Okay.
We'll come back to analyze
We'll come back to analyze that. Let me welcome Mr. Bernice Abu-Baidoo Lansah to the program. Good morning, sir. Thanks for your time. So you are representing TUC, and in the tripartite committee, TUC represents organized labor. The question I just posed to my colleague, I'm sure, is a question on the minds of a lot of people. So 15% cost of living allowance, an increase in the minimum wage, about 1 CD 35 pesos. Does this necessarily translate into an increase in salaries of workers?
Thank you very much, and a good morning to our viewers and listeners. This issue about minimum wage has nothing to do with salary increments. They are two separate discussions. The minimum wage, as you all know, is the baseline for any employer to consider remunerating his or her employees. We have vulnerable workers in this country who, unlike you and I, can sit before their employers and negotiate for their salaries. Your house help at your home, the cleaner at somebody's restaurant, the laundry person, these are people who have no say with their employers. So government has this daily national minimum wage to enable employers have a base for such vulnerable workers. This also, I must add, has some tax implications. And we always forget that the PAYE that GRA calculates on our salary, all of us, including yourself and myself, the minimum wage is always free. So it has effects not only on those vulnerable workers or setting the floor for remuneration, but also on every worker who pays PAYE. But let's not confuse this with salary increment. They are two separate things.
Mr. Kodia, the reason I brought in that was that, I mean, since the announcement came yesterday, a cursory look at comments on social media suggested that, I mean, this is very insignificant for a lot of people. They felt like the increase was very insignificant and it wouldn't even add up anything to their lives. So we needed to clear that for starters and setting the foundation for the conversation. But I have your communique in front of me, and in your conclusion, you mentioned that any establishment, institution, or organization that does not adhere to the newly announced daily minimum wage, which takes effect in 2023, January 1, will be sanctioned according to law. How do you ensure that employers actually adhere to this daily minimum wage?
Thank you very much. This is a function of the Labor Inspectorate Division. It is their job to go around and inspect whether employers are complying to the law with respect to daily minimum wage. Unfortunately for this country, the Inspectorate Division is almost defunct. You can walk into Labor Department and see their office and the resources they have. So in the absence of that, it makes the employee vulnerable. But if the state can ensure retool the labor department and get them to do what they have to do, i.e. go around and inspect and check whether the law is being upheld, I'm sure we can make progress in getting employers to comply to this law.
So in other words, until we have the inspectorate fully functioning, this is likely going to be an empty threat.
Well, perhaps government can come up with some task force together with labor to do some checks to ensure that companies are complying. But the duty with respect to the law is on the labor inspectorate division. They are supposed to do this and ensure that everyone complies to such directive.
Right. In your earlier response, when you were talking about vulnerable workers, you gave examples like cleaners and domestic helps and all that. I see here that we have establishment, institutions, and organizations, but we know individuals employ people like these. They're not included here. Is that to suggest that they're exempt? And if not, why were they not included in people that will be, people that must ensure that they adhere to the daily minimum wage?
Okay. Anybody in an employment relationship is covered by this daily minimum wage. So it could be yourself with your few employers as a self-employed person. That your employers therein are covered. So anybody in an employment relationship in this country is covered by this.
Right.
We take some of these things for, I admit that, and whatever increment that has come has no bearing with reality. But the fact is that we also have some workers whose incomes, not a lot though, a few of them in this country, are also being determined or varied as and when by employers. Mm-hmm. And we can find this mainly in our domestic settings. When you bring somebody from your village to be your house help in your house, and then you decide that because you are feeding him or hosting him, you pay him 200 cedis or 100 cedis. These are not right. So there are a class of workers who really need this floor to enhance. But I must admit that those are in the minority in this country.
Right. I'm happy that you mentioned that this increase for some may not necessarily have a bearing on what happens in real life. In fact, the Deputy Minister for Employment has said that the increase could have been higher, but unfortunately, due to the situation that we find ourselves in as a country and all the parties involved, i.e. employers, including government, which also employs and all that, we need to find a fine balance. Now, you say that you consider the current economic challenges, the cost of living, but the big question is, will anybody, whether a household, a cleaner, who is realistically going to be a beneficiary of this increase, going to see any significant change in their life? Couldn't we have gone a little higher with our daily minimum wage for 2023?
I am for something higher, obviously, especially looking at what the economy has become lately. Negotiation, for me, comes in three folds. The ability to pay from the employer or the government is one. Then the reasonability of what the employee is also asking also comes into play. And then we negotiate in good faith. In this instance, I must add that the reasonability of the employee in real terms should have been much, much more than what has been agreed on. Your colleague just outlined and enumerated the increments in almost everything and the rates. These are over 100%. So if you want to look at what is a real income or the floor for any employee in this country, and you even do the 50 cedis per day, you are going to about 1,003 something as minimum wage. Then it comes to the ability to pay by the employer, and that is where the tussle is. I agree, and I am for the employee that the 401 as will take effect January would not be close to enough to sustain any reasonable employee in this country.
Mr. Kodia, so why didn't you push for this? And if you did push for this during the negotiations, what reasons were you giving for not government or the other parties not being able to agree on a higher quote?
Right. So from 365 daily minimum wage now, as it stands now, obviously a reasonable daily minimum wage in these hard times should be about 50 cedis a day. But you can also admit that the employers, not government per se, but employers, are also facing the same economic hardship. I'm not here to speak for them.
Sure. But you were all part of the negotiations.
Yes, I want to be fair in the discussion. The hardship is both on the employer and the employee. So you find a common stand where you are sure that you can have a win-win for both parties. I believe that we have to look at the discussion in a broader sense than just the daily minimum wage. My sister, if you increase the daily minimum wage by even up to 50 cedis, and we don't check what is eroding the income, in no time it becomes useless. What has transpired over the year from late last year to now is unacceptable. Any income you have is eroded, whether minimum wage or your actual salary is eroded. And to what extent can you restore it? Our job as union leaders is to at least restore the value of the wage for the employee, if we cannot even add to it. What has happened in this daily minimum wage, I must admit, it's not even about restoration. Because if we're looking about restoration for the wage, then we'll be talking about something close to maybe 35 cedis or 40 cedis for the employee. But it comes to negotiation, and in negotiations, you consider wider things than what you think should be the reality.
Right. So finally, before I let you go, for persons who are not paid above the minimum wage, and for organizations or individuals that always use the base as a means of calculating the exact salaries for their workers, what it means now is that they must adhere, definitely, because that's according to the law, to the new increase 14.88, 14 cedis, 88 pesos, and then give 15% of that cumulative amount as a cost of living allowance to that worker, right?
Yes. But that is also one of the difficulties that we foresee. How do you compel the employer to adhere to the COLA? There should be. It's not about signing a communique. There should be deliberate effort to ensure that besides raising the minimum wage to 401, the extra 60 cedis that should come as COLA for the employee is paid by the employer. So we are looking at about 460 cedis being the minimum wage plus the COLA for any ordinary employee who should earn the minimum wage. But if we agree on certain things, and the states whose duty it is to ensure and enforce that employers are adhering to this are not doing that, then the communique becomes a little meaningless. And for us as labor, that is our biggest worry. But let me add and that every worker who pays PAYE has benefited from this daily minimum wage when it starts in January.
Right.
It's not, yes, everybody who earns salary and who pays PAYE to GRA will benefit from this upward adjustment. Your income tax calculation, like I mentioned earlier on, there's a tax-free, which is always the daily minimum wage. It used to be 365, now it's going to be 401. It means that a portion of your income is not going to be taxed, right, and that will add to your little income.
So it means you're going to see a slight increase then
on anybody who pays PAYE to GRA. Come January 1st, when GRA must adjust their PAYE calculations and have a tax-free for the minimum wage. So it's going to touch you and I in a very minute way, but that is what is going to happen.
I appreciate your time here this morning, Mr. Twene-Boakodua. Ken Twene-Boakodua is Vice Chairman of the Trades Union Congress, and we've been having a conversation about the new daily minimum wage for January 1, 2023. And if you're not aware, it's increased to 14 cedis, 88 pesos, an increase of about 1 cedi, 35 pesos. My colleague Kofi J earlier took us through the breakdown, what it has been like since 2012. We've also been talking about, in terms of USD and the poverty line, what it really means. Ghana has gone below the prescribed poverty line. And we had Mr. Ken Twene-Boakodua also tell us what went into really arriving at this new figure. So, Kofi, yeah, we heard him. Looks like the commentary on social media is this is not going to really make a lot of difference for people if the other elements that are draining people's salaries are not dealt with.
Actually created hypotheses that we had to check. So, assuming we are going by, the normal 50 cedis that we said could be, the average for the average Ghanaian at the moment. So if you're earning 50 cedis a day, it means for 30 days you should get around 1,500. But if you use the current daily minimum wage, which will take effect in January, which is 14 cedis, 80 pesos, it means for 30 days you earn 461 cedis. If you do the math, it means someone living in Ghana will need an additional, let's say, like 1,000 cedis for that person to be able to offset the kind of change between the 14 cedis, 80 pesos, and the 50 cedis that we think that should be the daily minimum wage. But we've been checking this as well. What has been the impact of inflation on the salaries of workers in Ghana? This is actually our own calculations. We did not even use the current 40.4 inflation rate. We used the 37.2% inflation rate. So, Bernice, just look at this. Assuming you were earning 3,000 cedis, October last year, that same 3,000 cedis is now 1,884, just because inflation is 37.2. We know it's 40.4, but we are using 37.2. It means the value lost just because of inflation is 1,116. You are paying an invincible tax worth 1,116. If you were earning 4,000 cedis October last year, that same 4,000 cedis is now 2,512 cedis. The invincible tax, or what you've lost, is 1,488. And if you were earning, let's say, 10,000 cedis, that same 10,000 cedis is now just 6,280. You've lost 3,720. And this is actually the average or the at least situation. It could be more. So we've also been looking at it in terms of dollar terms. Your 3,000 cedis in dollar terms at the beginning of the year was $468.75. And just because of exchange rate, if you use $1 to 14 cedis, 20 pesos, it means your 3,000 cedis, which was $468 at the beginning of the year, is now $205. The amount you've lost just between January and November is $263. If you're earning 4,000 cedis, it was worth $625. Now $275. Amount loss is 351. So if you go through all these figures and then you look at the 14.88 daily minimum wage that has actually been, let's say, recommended, and it will take effect in January, then you ask yourself, how will consumers or how will the ordinary Ghanaian actually fare the following or next year if you look at all these effects, the effects of invincible tax, and then also exchange rates of minimum wage?
And something that just occurred to me is the IMF has warned that many countries will experience something similar to a recession in 2023. We are hoping that Ghana won't be a part of such countries.
Oh,
but
we are actually.
Yes.
Because we are a developing country. And they said for us to get back to the level we were in 2019, it will take us at least 6 years. Yes.
Right. So it means that people must brace themselves for tougher times.
Absolutely.
Well, so this is what it is for many of you as Ghanaian workers like myself. The conclusion, I believe, is that there are tougher times ahead and people must just brace themselves. But this morning, we've been talking about the national daily minimum wage announced by the tripartite committee and what it will really mean for you as a worker. Well, it's 3 days to the 2022 World Cup, and Adanse Travels has a special package and new promotions for you. I will be back to tell you more about that. Do stay.